accepting everything you've said about that there has been abuse and that no one would doubt the Home Office's work on clamping down on that. But those people who are genuinely working as adult social care workers to the country, the ministerial foreword to the social care fair pay agreements, adult social care workers are the unsung heroes of our country, but for too long they've not had the voice and recognition they deserve. Do you think these proposals recognise those potentially 40,000 people who are working in adult social care?
Look, yes, I do, because we are talking about moving to a system where we are rewarding contribution. You'll know that the questions that are open in the consultation, refer to the need for transitional arrangements, potentially for some groups. We will obviously want to consider all of those responses properly, but we're not being fair to workers that are legitimately working, making their contribution in this country, if we also ignore the many thousands that were unexpected or the dodgy practices in this part of the labour market. So I think that it's about striking the right balance. Certainly, I would agree with that. But the reason why we're making these changes is in part to deal with some of the abuse that we have seen.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. So the video you are about to see is the current Home Secretary of this great country, United Kingdom, in the midst of important personalities, where she was called forward to explain why she and her party have decided to extend the eligibility period for ILR from 5 years to 10. And not just extending it, but also planning to apply the rule retrospectively. That's to say that people that are already here, people that are already on the route, some of these people may be qualified for ILR in the next 6 months, in the next 1 year, or as the case may be, that these people will not have to wait for extra 5 years. So, it seems very, very unfair, according to them. I will let you watch it so that you hear for yourself. So many of them felt that this is not fair. It's not fair to migrant community, for the fact that some of them came here during Boris wave to help fight COVID. There was one particular point that I noted on this video, and it actually struck me, to be honest. As we all know, there is a consultation going on, which is closing on the 12th of this month, in a couple of days. And this consultation is for people to express themselves. Government do not want to make that decision themselves, so they have thrown it back to the public. And the thing that actually struck me is that, according to her, over 1.6 million people could be affected. That's talking about people that could be eligible for ILR in the next couple of years. And that is the reason why she and her party have decided to extend it, considering the fact that they think these people could have access to benefit following their eligibility for ILR. So now, out of those 1.6 million people, just 360,000 people have responded to that consultation. It's really shocking, isn't it? And out of those 360,000 people, you could even see people that are in support, because, of course, everybody is entitled to their opinions. All the debate that have been coming forward, right from the very first one that they did on the 8th of September last year, those of us that have been following me on this channel, I brought the news to you at the time. So the last one they just did last week, regarding the petition that over 300,000 people signed, urging the government to remove access to benefits and still keep the 5-year ILR route. All the responses that they have been giving out, guys, is referring people back to that consultation. So this will tell you that they are likely going to make their decision based on the feedback they get from that consultation. Please, if you have not filled out that consultation, kindly do. I will leave the link to the consultation on the description box of this video and on the comment section. So let me quickly make this big disclaimer. Please, this video does not constitute or serve as any form of legal advice. Is just for information purpose, so you know what is happening in the United Kingdom. I will now leave you to watch the video. Thank you.
In particular with the health and care visa for social care workers, where there was an intention to fill a gap of between 6,000 and 40,000 workplaces, between 600 and 16,000 people arrived. So on any measure, the numbers that we've seen in the last few years are unprecedented. There isn't any other equivalent period where we've seen such a large number of people arrive and such a mismatch between what the expectation was and what has in fact happened. So So I think on scale and pace, and also the unprecedented nature of what we are seeing, I think it's something akin to signing up to free movement with the European Union. That's the sort of, historic sort of only other comparator that you could possibly look at. I think the other particular feature here is the changes to the rules made in 2020 on what would be allowed under the skilled worker route. Those changes where it was dropped to below RQF level 6 has meant that we've just seen a much bigger range of lower skilled migration as well. So in 2021, only 13% of skilled workers were below RQF level 6. By 2024, that had risen to 53%. So on, as I say, on any measure, these are huge shifts in the type of legal migration that we've seen into the country. And I do think that they demand a new response, particularly as the people that have arrived will be applying for settlement in the next few years. I think it's something like 1.6 million on our central estimate would be the number of people that are applying for settlement. So the scale and pace, the unprecedented nature of it, the particular element around the lowered requirements for skilled workers, I think do demand some fresh answers from the government.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is really about deterrence more than anything else, and that you hope that it will reduce the net migration numbers. Can you point to that's the impact that those reforms will have?
So I wouldn't say it's deterrence. There is a particular issue where we've seen a very, very large scale of migration into the country, much more than was expected, of a very different nature to what we've had before, both in terms of the skills range, the number of dependents. I think something like 50% of the care work numbers are accounted for by dependents of workers. Again, unprecedented numbers that we've not seen before. So I think that demands an answer from us, because at the point of settlement, without any change, all of those individuals are of course able to access social housing, access to the welfare state, and because of the lower skilled nature of many of these people in terms of their salary expectations, you can expect that there will be a correlation between those numbers and then those who may then require assistance from the state having achieved settled status if we don't have a change in these rules. So it's not, I wouldn't mischaracterise it as deterrence. It is about managing what has been an uncontrolled wave of migration into the country, and I do think that we have to consider what the impacts would be if, with no changes, all of these people were able to obtain settlement at 5 years, which is what the current rules would allow.
Final question from me. How do you distinguish between earning settlement and simply just delaying it? What's the kind of fundamental difference, and how do you see that contribution working?
Well, I think we've already announced that we want to go from a baseline 5-year qualifying period to 10 years, which we're not consulting on. I think at 5 years, we have a relatively generous welfare state. I think at 5 years, that's actually quite a short period before people can be permanently settled in the country with all of the benefits that brings. I think it's right, therefore, that we extend it. And then in the range of proposals we've set out, there are obviously some things that could help you bring that qualifying period down. So if you're a particularly high earner, you've come through on any of the global talent routes, you're a higher band tax payer, you can earn that period down from 10 years to potentially 3. But then the reverse is true as well. So if you do fall upon the state and you end up accessing benefits, that can increase your qualifying period. I think it's showing that contribution, that staying in work, that making a contribution to the taxpayer, your good character, all of these things count towards earning settled status and a lifelong ability to be in this country. I think it's fair that we set some thresholds, that we refresh the thresholds we currently have, and are able to show the public that we're rewarding the behaviours that everybody wants to see, but that actually if you do fall upon the state, if you do end up accessing the welfare state, that you are then, it does take you longer, therefore I think, to earn settlement. At the end of the day, this is a system of bringing workers into the country, so it is about managing economic migration. I think it's fair to have an expectation that those people are therefore making an economic contribution to the country.
But that's really just rewarding high earners, isn't it, as opposed to encouraging a contribution?
Well, I think,
but
I mean, you're only bringing in workers to benefit your economy, right? So, of course, you would want to look at earnings in that context. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Successive governments have made the argument for wanting this country to be a country that can attract the brightest and the best. I think that's... it will be odd if we weren't trying to do that. Of course, sometimes we have labour market shortages in areas where the skills levels or earnings capacities are lower. And of course, we have the Migration Advisory Committee that advises on that. But it does have to be in a controlled way. And what we saw under the previous government was a very uncontrolled growth in the number of lower skilled and therefore lower earning migrants coming to the country.
Thank you, Home Secretary.
I think it'd be fair to say that the real increase was sort of 2022, 2023. Have you seen any evidence that ministers had any control of what was happening at that time? Were they conscious and aware of the numbers that were coming in that sort of 2022-23 period?
Well, I am not, as you will know, able to see the papers of the previous government, so difficult for me, being in the building now, to be able to see exactly what was happening under the previous administration. Although what I would say is just the publicly available numbers did show a big increase, and certainly as a constituency member of Parliament, I mean, I know that in Birmingham Ladywood I was starting to pick up casework that related to people who thought they were coming to work in the care sector, and actually the provider ended up being dodgy, shut down, took all their money, and then they were left with nowhere to go. So I think it was becoming apparent fairly quickly that the big growth was challenging.
Ministers should have seen that. I mean, I was a minister in the Home Office at one point. I know the kind of controls that we had at that time and seeing of who was coming in and what was happening. So ministers ought to have been aware.
I think it's inconceivable that they wouldn't have been aware at all. Obviously, it'll be for them to explain what exactly they knew and when. But even if you just go by the information that was publicly available and you could see the big growths in net migration, I think it became very clear very quickly that there was a different nature to this type of migration in that year in particular.
That makes sense. Peter Prinsley.
Thank you very much. So thank you for coming this morning. So why are high earners more useful citizens than people who are not high earners?
Well, we are talking about a system of economic migration, so I think it would be odd to say that you're not looking at earnings. I mean, you're looking for people to come and work, and the intention is that they can support themselves. You're not looking to bring in people who will ultimately require assistance from the welfare state, potentially for the rest of their lives. The point is to be making an economic contribution, and of course, we are in a competition with countries around the world for the brightest and the best talent. We want to grow our economy. There are, big sectors, in the tech world, in the development of AI, in our health service, where obviously there's global talent to be hunted after, and we would want to bring them into this country ahead of others. So I think, forgive me, but I would find it odd if we weren't trying to bring in the brightest and the best into this country. And of course, that does have a correlation with earnings as well.
Now, I quite understand that, but the demand in this country for workers is not always for high earners. We have large numbers of people who, for instance, work in the care sector, who are not high earners, but who are nevertheless extremely useful members of society, and we need to be able to attract people to come to work in those sectors. That was my first...
Yes, no, which I do understand, but what I would repeat back to you is that under the previous government, there was an expectation of a market shortage for workers in social care of between 6,000 and 40,000. I mean, that is actually quite a big range, so it tells you that there's an unreliability in the understanding of exactly what the needs of that part of the workforce are. But I mean, there's no world in which you could say even at 40,000 that then you shouldn't have a response when in fact 616,000 people come. That was never what was envisaged. Half of them are dependents. I think it is right to then ask a question about what that means for the capacity of the welfare state to potentially absorb that number of people.
No, I absolutely get that. So some changes have already been put in place, and what I understand is that net migration may be falling to very, very low levels already. Do you anticipate, say by the end of this year, we may be in a situation where we've got more people leaving the country than are in fact arriving?
Look, I mean, I would dispute that net migration is at very, very low levels. It's still really quite high in terms of it. I mean, it's had a big drop from the very large increases that you saw under the previous administration, but it is still comfortably at around over 200,000, isn't it? Yeah. So, which on any measure is still quite a high range. I mean, when I first came into Parliament, we were talking about migration in the tens of thousands back in the days of 2010 onwards. So, I'd say it's still pretty high. I mean, I'm not targeting a particular fall in net migration through these changes. What I'm targeting is a better managed, controlled system that can deal with this very particular problem we've now got of many hundreds of thousands of people arriving in the country, half of whom are dependents. It's a change which was never planned for, never thought about, and which now leaves us with a big problem to fix.
Lewis Atkinson.
Thank you, Home Secretary. Can I just drill down on this? Is the issue the numbers that arrived, or is it the potential scale of the recourse to public funds as a result of the numbers? Because
I mean, the two are related.
Yes, absolutely. But is a policy intention to, by a set of changes, encourage people who may have arrived to now leave? Or is it to have the same amount of people, that 800,000 a year that you mentioned, staying here but have much more limited recourse to public funds, given social housing waiting lists and other issues that there are across the country?
Well, we're consulting on the precise nature of whether you look at changing the rules on settlement and recourse to public funds. That would, of course, require primary legislation, or whether you simply extend the qualifying period to beyond 10 years for particular cohorts of lower skilled workers. So I think that is an open question, and we are genuinely consulting on that. The policy intention is to deal with a particular issue that we have seen. As I say, I'm not driving trying to get a particular decrease. Some of those individuals will find work and will be able to make a contribution, and we are setting the rules and consulting on those rules about how we measure that contribution, what that buys you on your qualifying period. But if you get to your qualifying period, whatever it might end up being, 10 years, maybe a bit longer, and you've made your economic contribution, you can fulfil the mandatory requirements, you will obviously be able to attain settlement in the country. So we're not trying to prevent anyone from ever getting settlement, but we are wanting to change the rules by which they do that. And of course there will be some workers that are not able to do that, and then they would not have a basis for remaining in the country either.
There's presently, I believe, a 5-year private life route for children and young people who've spent most of their life in the UK. Are you proposing to retain that?
We will protect the position of those that are already here and in line with the commitments that were made when we published the immigration white paper last summer. But separately to that, there will obviously need to be a consideration of what's happening under the new system, and we will want to make sure that they are all coherent and sit together properly. Again, that is the point of the consultation. But the pre-existing commitments in relation to children we will fulfil and honour.
I think people will find that very reassuring.
I'm going to move on to medium-skilled workers and adult social care with Margaret Malone.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Home Secretary. I'm kind of hearing a theme through your responses today about fairness to the country, and essentially it's an economic argument, that kind of thing as well. So the government has said that settlement should be earned on the basis of what you contribute to public life. So I think that sense of fairness would sit well with our constituents. But how is the contribution of adult social care workers been reflected fairly in the earned settlement proposals?
Well, I think that the proposals are fair and that they are trying, I think, to meet the scale of the challenge, which I won't repeat. I know we've got to get onto the topics, but I would just repeat the unprecedented nature of the numbers that we have seen, the huge scale of abuse that occurred in the social care sector. We've had to revoke something like 1,000 sponsor licenses in the care sector. So I think, A, it was right to close that route, which was open to such abuse as we saw. B, so many more people came than were expected to have arrived. And so, C, that means there has to be a response. I think it's not just about the fairness to the workers that arrived, but also to the communities in which they live, given attendant pressures on social housing, on the welfare state more broadly, and public services as well.
So then, following on from that, my constituents would see the social care workers looking after people with dementia, autism, contributing, as you say, as well. So then that kind of ties them in to sponsored visas. We had, I mentioned this in a previous meeting, we had all the workers come up, one of the trade unions brought them up, and there's still some very bad practice in the kind of social care with the sponsored visas. But then if these kind of measures all go through as you want, you're going to have a shortage then, aren't you, of workers? And they have contributed, haven't they? So some of these bad practice kind of agents are saying, well, if you don't like it, leave the country after all they've contributed. Do you think that's fair?
Well, I think that we've had a lot of dodgy providers in this area. That's why we've closed the route, and that's why we've revoked so many sponsor licenses. It's obvious that as the rules were changed and we started looking at lower skilled migrants, that those new routes were open to abuse. It's one of the reasons why, in fact, going back to Mr. Prinsley's earlier line of questioning, we do look at the brightest and the best at the top end of the spectrum for skills levels and income. You don't tend to see the same kind of abuse, right? So I think that's why we've taken the action we've already taken. And then the question is, what do we do about the numbers that are still here? We've obviously tried to support some of those care workers who've been left with, through no fault of their own, that providers no longer able to sponsor them, try to find them work elsewhere. We've been working closely with the Department for Health on that. We'll obviously carry on doing that. But in a way, I think what you've just seen proves the point of why we need a new policy answer for what's happened here, because it can't simply be to absorb everybody, especially when you consider that 50%, something like 50% or just over 50% of all of those individuals are dependents, which again is not a pattern we have seen before.
The engagement you've had, you mentioned it with the Department of Health on the impact of the changes. Do you see going forward that your preference is going to be to increase the pay and conditions, or you're going to recruit from overseas? What way do you see this going? Because whichever way you go, there's going to be shortages, isn't there?
To the extent that we have shortages in any sector, of course, the Migration Advisory Committee advises on what those should be, and we will always take that advice on board. I think specifically on social care, of course, you'll know that the Health Secretary has been saying that we'll have a fair pay agreement for the care sector, I believe, by 2028. So there is a need for us, as a society, to reckon with the challenges that are presented with an ageing population and what that demands of social care. And of course the government will have a commission on that as well. So there will be, I think, bigger changes for social care more broadly. The problem that I'm dealing with, though, in this space is, under the previous administration, there was an assessment of the skills shortage that was going to be filled, and actually we've had many magnitudes of numbers
between
higher
10 and
than
100
that.
from what you've said, 10 and 100 times the amount.
I mean, it's just, exactly. So there's no version of this in which you don't have to take some action here now, just because even if you took those assessments at the highest level, which was about 40,000, from 40,000 to 616,000 is a lot.